Namaskar, Michael.
Namaskaram.
Thank you for having the discussion. And well, the question I sent you was that what is real, what is unreal, and how to unrealize the unreal. Yes,
Okay.
there are many things we experience. So what of it is real, what of it is unreal, and the real is real. We don't have to realize it more.
Yeah.
Yes, and the unreal needs to be unrealized.
Yes.
So, you want to start with that?
Okay. In Bhagavan's teachings, real means what actually exists. And unreal means what doesn't actually exist, even if it seems to exist. So the question then is, what is it that actually exists? Bhagavan answers this in Nana. In the 7th paragraph, he begins by saying, Yatatamai Ulludu Atma Sarupam Andre. Yatatam is a Sanskrit word that means real or actual. Yatatamai is a Tamil adverb formed from this Sanskrit word. So yatatamai means actually, really. Ulladu means what exists. So yatatamai ulladu is what actually exists. Atma sarupam andre. Andre means Andrew is one. Andre is an emphatic way of saying only. So what actually exists is only Atma Swarupa. Swarupa literally means own form, but it implies the real nature of something, what a thing actually is. So Atma Swarupa is the real nature of ourself, or what we actually are.
The essence, yes, like the essence or the nature. Or...
Yeah, you could say essence, but that alone is what we are. We are not actually anything else. Now we seem to be something. Now we seem to be this person, this body, which is a bundle of 5 sheaths. This is what we seem to be. But what we actually are, that alone is what actually exists. In other words, since we alone are what actually exists, everything else, though other things seem to exist, they do not actually exist. That's why Bhagavan goes on in the next sentence to say, Jagajiveshwaragal. That means that's a compound of 3 words, Jagam, Jivan, and Ishwara. That, in other words, world, soul, and God. Sipil velipol, like silver in a shell. That is, shells often have a silvery lining. And one can, if you're looking for something on the ground, you can mistake a shell to be a piece of silver. That's the idea. But that silver obviously isn't real. It just seems to be silver, but it's actually just a shell. So like silver in a shell, Adil Karpanegal. So the world, soul, and God are Karpane in it. In it means in that one thing that actually exists, namely Atma Swarupa. Karpane is, that is in Tamil, it's Karpane, but it's a Sanskrit word, Kalpana. Kalpana, in the past I used to translate Kalpana as imagination. But I think a better translation is fabrication, because imagination is a rather superficial activity of the mind. We can sit here and imagine a brighter future, or we can imagine bad things happening in future. These are all superficial activities of the mind. But when Bhagavan says the world, soul, and God are kalpana, he means they're fabrications. Yes, they are mental fabrications, but of a much fabrications at a much more fundamental level than imaginations. According to Bhagavan, everything is a fabrication. That means it doesn't actually exist. It just seems to exist. That is the implication. It's if you fabricate something, you can fabricate a story. which isn't a real story, but you just make up a story. It's fabricated. You can, in modern cinema, for example, or any type of film or television, we have, with the assistance of computer-aided animation, you can fabricate so many things. You can fabricate dinosaurs, dragons, all sorts of creatures that were long since extinct or that are merely mythological. That's all fabrication. So like that, the world, soul, and God, they're mere fabrications. Just like the silver in a shell, it's a mere fabrication. There's no silver in that shell. It just seems to be silver. And then he goes on to say, these three, like the world, soul, and God, appear simultaneously and disappear simultaneously. He doesn't go into more detail here, but as he makes it clear, when he's talking here about the world and God, he's talking about the world and God as they appear from the view of ourself as the jiva. Jiva means ego. So when we rise as ego, we see God as something other than ourselves. And we see the world as a multitude of forms. As Bhagavan says, for example, in the 4th verse of Ulladu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. That is, so long as we take ourselves to be the form of a body, the world will appear to be a multitude of forms, and we cannot conceive of God as anything other than a form. Even if we say God is formless, that idea God is formless is an idea. All ideas are form, they're mental forms. So we cannot know God. What God actually is formless. And as something formless, that which is formless has no limitation. So when God, since God is formless, that means he has no limitation. So he is the infinite whole. Nothing can be other than him. So God is nothing other. God as he actually is nothing other than Atma-swarupa. But when we rise as ego, limit ourselves as the form of this body, God seems to be something other than ourselves. That's the sense in which he says God is a fabrication. Not that the reality of God is a fabrication, but God as we know him is a fabrication, just like the world is a fabrication. And just like the jiva itself, we as ego, we ourselves are a fabrication. So since, as Bhagavan made clear, since the world and God appear as separate from ourselves only when we rise as ego, these three appear simultaneously and disappear simultaneously. That is, as soon as we rise as ego, we experience ourselves as the form of a body, and this body is a small object in this seemingly vast universe. So all the other forms of the universe come into existence only when we rise as ego. As he says, for example, in verse, he says this in so many ways, in so many different places, but in Ulladu verse 26, he says it very clearly. Ahande undayan anatum undahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahande indrail indru anatum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. So the world and God appear only when we appear as jiva, as ego. So these three appear simultaneously and disappear simultaneously. And when he said they appear simultaneously and disappear simultaneously, since they don't actually exist, they seem to exist only when they appear. Some people, they try to twist give a. They may not intend it to be a twisted interpretation, but because they cannot fully accept what Bhagavan is saying, many people say, yes, the world seems to exist only when or the world appears when we rise as ego. But even when we don't rise as ego, the world is still there. That is not what Bhagavan is saying. He's saying what actually exists is only Atma-swarupa. The world, soul, and God do not exist at all. They're no more existent or real than the silver in the shell. They're a mere appearance. So when he said that these three appear simultaneously and disappear simultaneously, though he uses the words appear, tondri, and disappear, mare kindrana, what he implies is they come into existence simultaneously and they cease to exist simultaneously. And then he goes on to say, to reiterate what he said in the first sentence. In the first sentence, he said, Atma-swarupa alone is what actually exists. In the last set of sentences, 3-4 small sentences, he uses the word swarupa. Well, in the next 3 sentences, he uses swarupa on its own. But what he means by swarupa is the swarupa of ourself. In other words, Atma-swarupa, what we actually are. So swarupa alone is the world. Swarupa alone is I. The I meaning the jiva or ego. Swarupa alone is God. When he says Swarupa is the world, Swarupa is I, Swarupa is God, again, we need to be careful about understanding what he means. That is, Swarupa is not actually the world. It's not actually the ego or soul. It's not actually God. That is, Swarupa is what appears as the world. Swarupa alone is what appears as ego. Swarupa alone is what appears as God. That is the implication. Because he says Swarupa alone is what actually exists. So all this multiplicity that we now experience, though it appears to be multiple, it is actually one. The one thing that actually exists, namely Atma-swarupa. And then he concludes by saying, Ellam Shiva Swarupamam. Everything is Shiva Swarupa. So all this multiplicity actually is nothing other than Swarupa, which is Shiva himself. Shiva is, because Bhagavan was talking to Shiva Kashan Pillai, who is from a Shaivite background. When he says everything is Shiva, Shiva is more or less, in Shaivite terminology, Shiva is equatable with Brahman. What in Vedanta is called Brahman, in Shaivism is called Shiva. It's the one absolute reality. And that Brahman obviously is Atma-swarupa. So Shiva is Atma-swarupa. So he says everything is Shiva-swarupa. In other words, we alone are what actually exists. So what Shiva actually is and what we actually are, they're one and the same. So Shiva-swarupa and Atma-swarupa are one. And everything is that. That is the only thing that actually exists. Since that is the one thing that actually exists, all this multiplicity doesn't actually exist. Or at least it doesn't exist as multiplicity. We can understand this. For example, Bhagavan uses here the analogy of silver in a shell. The silver in a shell doesn't exist as actual silver. It's actually just a shiny coating formed on the shell. So it exists as that shiny coating, but it doesn't exist as Shiva. Likewise, all this multiplicity doesn't actually exist as multiplicity, but it does exist as the one Swarupa, which is Shiva, which is our own real nature.
The superimposition, yes, exactly.
We can say a superimposition, but Bhagavan is saying when it's more than a superimposition. That is, what actually exists is only Swarupa. So what we see as all this, it's just an appearance. We can say, yes, it is superimposed upon that. But words, of course, fail us. Often in Advaita, they use this idea of superimposition. But that's when we talk about superimposition, one thing is superimposed upon another thing. Yeah. But actually, what Bhagavan is emphasizing here, there's only one thing. So yes, it is a superimposition, but the superimposition is a fabrication. It's not real. It's just what is real is only that which underlies it, namely Atma-swarupa. So, as I say, I mean, your question was, what is real? My answer is what is or the answer both of them would give is what is real is what actually exists, and what actually exists is only Atma-swarupa, ourself. So it's very important because there's a lot of debate in Vedanta about what is real and what is unreal. In Advaita, it's generally said Brahman alone is real, the world is unreal. But what does it mean by that? Obviously, other interpretations of Vedanta, they strongly object to the Advaitic view that the world is real. But the Advaitic view that the world is real, what is meant when it is said, sorry, the Advaitic view that the world is unreal, what Advaita means when it says the world is unreal is that even though the world seems to exist, it doesn't actually exist. What actually exists is only Atma-swarupa. In the Upanishads, in the Chandogya Upanishad, there are some verses, I can't remember the exact reference now, but there are some verses that said, in the beginning, there was one only without a second, ekam eva advaityam. And then in one verse, when it says what that one thing is, it says sat eva. Sat means being. So sat eva is, eva means alone. So what actually exists is being alone, existence alone. And in the next verse, it says the same thing, ekam eva advaityam, but there it says sattva eva. Sattva means beingness. So the being and beingness both amount to the same thing. So being, pure being alone is what actually exists. Bhagavan quotes this or refers to this statement that there's one only without a second in the beginning of the introduction, Avatarika, that he wrote for his Tamil translation of Drisya Viveka. He begins his introduction by saying, Ekam eva advitiyam Brahma. That is Brahman that is Brahman, which is one only without a second. He puts that in inverted commas. And then he explains it, those are Sanskrit words, he explains in Tamil, Adavadu irendatra Brahmam Andre. That is the Brahman alone, which is without a second, Ulladu, that alone exists. Ennum Advaita Siddhanta till. In this Advaita, Siddhanta means this final conclusion of Advaita. What is the final conclusion of Advaita? But only the Brahman alone, which is without a second, that alone is what exists. And he says, in this conclusion, if Brahman Andre Ayin, if Brahman alone exists, or if Brahman is only one, adu vilangadu prapanjam totru van ain. How or why it does, instead of it that is Brahman, if Brahman alone exists, instead of shining as the one thing that alone exists, not shining thus, why does it appear? Why does the world appear? This doubt will occur to any Uttama Adhikari, to any Adhikari means a person who is qualified. Uttama Adhikari means a person who is well qualified. Well qualified here means qualified for following this spiritual path. this path of self-investigation. So for the sake of such things, I mean, he goes on, explain the relevance of this text. But so Bhagavan is repeatedly emphasizing that what actually exists is only one thing. And that what is that one thing? We are that. This is exactly what the message of the Chandogya Upanishad, because the same Chandogya Upanishad that says that in the beginning there was one only without a second, later on it goes to say, Tattvamasi, that you are. So that one thing that actually exists, that is ourself. The Upanishads have been interpreted in many different ways by different schools of Vedanta. There are different schools of philosophy that have interpreted Vedanta in radically different ways, profoundly different ways. So everyone will accept, yes, in the beginning there was one only without a second, but the other forms of Vedanta, they will say that one has become many. But that can be, we can call that view into question. I mean, according to Advaita, since there's one only without a second, multiplicity is an appearance. Whereas according to other systems of Advaita, that one thing has become all these many things. So that their view is what is called Parinamavada. Parinamavada means the contention that things have undergone change. They have undergone transformation. So that one thing, Brahman, has become all this. That is the other systems of Advaita, of Vedantic philosophy. Whereas according to Advaita, Advaita doesn't accept Parinamavada. Advaita proposes Vivartavada. Vivartavada means it's an illusory appearance. So the one never became many, the one merely seems to be many, but the one always remains as it is. It's immutable. This Advaitic viewpoint is strongly supported by Krishna in a very important verse in the Gita. That is in chapter 2, verse 16. This is one of the, I think Krishna's teachings in the Gita begin from, I can't remember exactly which verse, maybe verse 10 or 11 of chapter 2. And this is verse 16. So this is one of the earliest teachings that Krishna gives in the Gita. And this is a verse that Bhagavan has translated into Tamil. He's translated into Tamil as verse 9 of Bhagavad Gita Saram. So I don't have the Sanskrit version at hand, but the Sanskrit, I mean, Bhagavan had made it clear what the Sanskrit version means in his Tamil translation. I'll just read the earlier part of the verse. Ilada tanaku irupu illai. That means, for what doesn't exist, there is no existence. Ulla tanaku, for what does exist, ilame embadu illai. What is called non-existence is not. So what this implies is, for what doesn't exist, there's no such thing as existence. So if something doesn't exist, it never exists. In other words, things that come into existence and cease to exist, they do not actually exist. They merely seem to exist. That is the implication. Because as he says in the second sentence, ulla tanaku ilame embadu illai, there's no such thing as non-existence for what does exist. In other words, what does exist must always exist. It cannot, something that exists, Bhagavan often expressed this in this way. If something exists at one time and not at another time, it doesn't actually exist even when it seems to exist. So this applies to all phenomena, the whole world. Now it seems to exist. But in sleep, it disappears. It ceases to exist. So since it doesn't always exist, it doesn't actually exist even when it seems to exist. Because if something actually exists, it must always exist. Something that comes into existence at one time and ceases to exist at another time is not truly existent, because its existence is dependent upon time. Take our bodies, for example. Our bodies were born some years prior to this present moment, and some years in the future, these bodies are going to cease to exist. So, since this body came into existence and will later cease to exist, it doesn't actually exist even when it seems to exist. So, this is what Krishna teaches. So, from this, if we apply this to what is said in the Chandogya Upanishad, but what exists never becomes non-existent. So when it is said in the beginning, what existed is one only without a second. Just pure being alone existed. There was no other thing other than that. That means all other things must have come into existence subsequent to that. Since they came into existence subsequent to that, in other words, since they didn't exist earlier, whatever comes into existence will also sooner or later cease to exist. So, since its existence is not eternal, it is a time-dependent existence. So, it is not a real existence. It's a mere appearance. So, from this we can understand why what Bhagavan's definition of reality is. Generally, when Bhagavan gave a definition of reality, what he said is there are three defining characteristics of what is real, or in other words, for what actually exists. Firstly, it must be eternal. Because if it's not eternal, it came into existence and it ceases to exist, that means it doesn't actually exist even when it seems to exist. So it must be eternal. It must be unchanging. Because if something changes, like our bodies, for example, when we were young, our bodies were the bodies of a small child. Over the years, our bodies have changed in so many ways. Since they're changing, this body now, we can't say this is the same body that existed then. I mean, even from a material point of view, probably every atom in this body that exists now is different to the atoms that form the body that existed then, because all the tissues of the body, they're constantly changing, and so this body is not the same body. So the body that existed then no longer exists. This body that exists now didn't exist then. That the material may have existed, but it didn't exist in its present form. So anything that undergoes change is not real, because it is not that is every change means when A becomes B, when A transforms into B, it ceases to be A and becomes B. So when a seed becomes a tree, the seed as such no longer exists, only the tree exists. So it's not the same thing. Though the tree grew from that seed, it's undergone a transformation. From being a tiny little seed, it's now grown into a huge tree. So whatever is changing is also not real. So what is not eternal is not real. What is changing is not real. And the third defining characteristic of what is real that Bhagavan gave is self-shining. In Sanskrit, they say swayam prakasa. So what is meant by self-shining? Shining, the word shining is often used in Indian philosophy with reference to a thing being known. For example, in verse 7 of Bhagavan says in verse 7 is, he talks about two things in the first sentence. He talks about Uluhu, which means world, and Arivu, which means awareness. But the awareness he's talking about here is not the real awareness, because he talks about this awareness rising and ceasing or subsiding. So since it's an awareness that rises and subsides, it's not the real awareness. So the awareness he's talking about here, what he refers to by the word arivu, which means awareness, is not the real awareness. It's not satchit, but it is the awareness that is called ego or mind. So I will when I say the word awareness here, I'm not talking about the real awareness. I mean, I'm translating the word Bhagavan uses. What Bhagavan is referring to is not the real awareness, it's only ego or mind. So what he says in the first sentence of this verse is, Uluhu arivum ondrai uditu odungum enam. That means, though the world and awareness rise and subside, ondrai means onely. In other words, it means simultaneously. So though the world and the awareness that knows the world, in other words, the ego, rise and subside simultaneously, uluhu arivu tannal olirum. The world shines by awareness. As I say, awareness here refers to the mind. So what it means is the world shines by the mind. So what does he mean by saying the world shines by the mind? That is, the world is known only by the mind. Without the mind, the appearance of the world would not be known. So it's shining implies the knownness of it, but that is the state of being known is shining. So when it is said, when in Vedanta or Bhagavan talk about Swayam Prakasa, self-shining, it means what shines independently, it shines by its own light. The world doesn't shine independently. The world shines only by the mind. And even the mind doesn't shine independently, because though mind here, when I say mind here, I'm referring to ego, because the term, when we use the term mind, we need to understand the term mind is used in different sense in different contexts. Often we often refer to the totality of the collection of thoughts that constitute the mind. We often refer to thoughts in general as mind. This is what Bhagavan says in verse 18 of Upadesha. He says, Enangale manam, thoughts alone are the mind. But then he goes on to analyze it further. Of all, meaning of all thoughts, the thought called I alone is the root. Therefore, what is called mind is only I, meaning only this thought I. I here means ego. But when Bhagavan talks about the thought called I, he's talking about ego. So the mind consists of two elements. One element, the knowing element of the mind, is ego. So ego is the mind as subject. All the other thoughts that constitute the mind are objects. They're things known by ego. Though ego or mind, in the sense of ego, appears to shine by its own light, it is not actually shining by its own light, because it is actually borrowing the light of awareness from the real awareness that is its own reality, its own essence, if you want. That is, ego is as Bhagavan made clear, ego is chit, as Bhagavan explained often, ego is chit jada granti. Chit jada granti means, chit means awareness, jada means what is not aware, and granti means not. So the ego is the knot that is formed by the entanglement of chit and jada. Chit means pure awareness, but of course, pure awareness is never entangled with anything. But from the perspective of ego, the awareness, the fundamental awareness I am, now seems to be mixed and conflated with this body. So we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. In this adjunct conflated awareness, I am is the pure awareness, chit. The body is jada, it's devoid of awareness. So that is the jada element. So when these two are conflated, entangled, it is called chit jada granti. So ego has an element of awareness in it. Though ego identifies itself with the body here means not just the physical body, all the five sheaths. So that includes the prana, the manas, the buddhi, and the chittam. These five make up the five sheaths. So these what we collectively experience as I. So as Bhagavan says in verse 5, Uru Pancha Kosa Uru, the body is a form composed of five sheaths. Therefore, all five are included in the term body. So, and all these are jada, they're all devoid of awareness. That is the thoughts that constitute the mind, the workings of the intellect, all the likes, dislikes, desires, hopes, fears, and so on that make up the will. And the seed form of all those, namely the vasanas, that's what really constitutes the will. What the will in essence is just vasanas, which are the seeds that sprout us all likes, dislikes, desires, and so on. These are all things known by us. We know our desires, we know our likes and dislikes. We even know the vasanas that give rise to these. We experience inclinations to like this or to dislike that. So these are all things known by us. So ego is the subject, all these other things are objects. But ego cannot rise or stand without conflating itself with a form, without grasping a form, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uludunapadu. So the ego rises and simultaneously projects and experiences itself as a body. And as soon as it projects a body, that body is part of a world. That's why he says in this verse, though the world and I'll translate Arivu as ego, because that's what it implies. Though the world and ego rise and subside simultaneously, it is by ego alone that the world shines. So, but as I say, though the world, so the world is dependent for its semi-existence upon ego, but ego is not shining by its own light. It's shining by the light of its chit element, which we can call its essence. What it actually is nothing but pure awareness. That is what ego essentially is, but we call it ego only when it's mixed and conflated with adjuncts. So ego is not shining by its own light, but by the light it borrows from the pure awareness, which is its own reality. So nothing in this world is self-shining, because all objects, they shine only by the light of the mind, by ego, that is. And even ego doesn't shine by its own light. It shines only by the light of the awareness that is its underlying reality. That awareness that is the underlying reality, that never appears or disappears. That awareness is the awareness I am. The one thing that we are aware of in all three states, although to say aware of is a little bit misleading, because when we say aware of, it sounds like it's an object, but obviously it's not an object. So to try to avoid saying aware of, the one awareness that is real is the awareness I am, because this is the only awareness that shines in all three states. Now we are aware I am, now in the waking state. In dream, we were aware I am. In sleep, we are aware I am. So this awareness I am is the one thing that shines constantly. The shining of this awareness I am is eternal and it's unchanging. Now it seems to be mixed and conflated with adjuncts, but essentially it remains unchanged. So what is self-shining is only our own existence. Our own existence, which is itself our awareness, that is Sat and Chit, the awareness and the being are one and the same. That is what Bhagavan refers to in the last sentence of this verse 7. He goes on to say, Uluhu Arivu Tondri Marivataku Idanai Tondri Mariadu Olirum Pundram Am Akte Porul. What that means is the that which shines without appearing or disappearing as the base or the ground or the place for the appearing and disappearing of the world and awareness, of world and ego, that alone is Porul. Which is Pundram. Pundram means is a Tamil word that means it's a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word Purna. That means the fullness, the whole. And Porul is a Tamil word that means more or less the same as Vastu in Sanskrit. It means the one fundamental reality, the substance, the one thing that underlies the appearance of all other things. So that is that which shines without ever appearing or disappearing. What is the one thing that never appears or disappears? It's that awareness I am. So that is what indirectly Bhagavan is saying, that awareness I am, that fundamental awareness from which the awareness that knows the world, namely ego, arises, and it arises with the world and ceases with the world. But underlying that, the fundamental awareness, but never appears nor disappears, but is the ground from which the world and awareness appear. That is, it's the ground for the appearing and disappearing. Like Bhagavan often used the analogy of the cinema screen. The cinema screen is the ground or the base on which cinema pictures appear and disappear. Whether the pictures appear on the screen or disappear, the screen is always there. So the fundamental awareness I am is like the screen. Ego and the world are like the pictures that appear and disappear. So, as I say, Bhagavan, the definition Bhagavan generally gave for reality is it must be eternal, it must be unchanging, and it must be self-shining.
Yeah.
In Maharshi's Gospel, there's a chapter, Vijnani and the World. In that, Bhagavan adds in a fourth lakshana, a fourth standard of reality. That is, he says, he mentions self-existence. What he says is, that if the context is someone is asking about how you can say the world is unreal. I'll just read back a little. The person who's asking Bhagavan says, neither do I deny the world's existence while I'm asleep. It's been existing all the while. If during my sleep I did not see it, others who were not sleeping, saw it. Bhagavan replies, to say that you existed while asleep, was it necessary to call in the evidence of others so as to prove it to you? Why do you seek their evidence now? I think evidence is maybe not quite the right word here, because Bhagavan would have answered in Tamil and it's been recorded in English. I think the term Bhagavan would probably have used here was the testimony. We don't need the testimony of others to know that we existed in sleep. So why do we seek the testimony of others now? I think that's what Bhagavan means here. So I think testimony would have been a better word here than evidence. Those others can tell you of having seen the world during your sleep only when you yourself are awake. With regard to your own existence is different. On waking up, you say you had a sound sleep, so that to the extent that you're aware of yourself in the deepest sleep, whereas whereas you have not the slightest notion of the world's existence then. Even now, while you're awake, is it the world that says, I am real, or is it you? And the devotee replies, of course I say it, but I say it of the world. And Bhagavan then says, well then, the world which you say is real is really mocking at you for seeking to prove its reality, while of your own reality you are ignorant. Bhagavan has a nice sense of humor. You want somehow or other to maintain that the world is real. What is the standard of reality? And then here he gives four things. He says that alone is real, which exists by itself, which reveals itself by itself, and which is eternal and unchanging. Well, eternal and unchanging, I've already talked about.
Yeah.
Reveals itself by itself means self-shining, and which exists by itself means self-existent. Since existence and awareness are one and the same, self-existence and self-shining are essentially one and the same thing. However, so generally Bhagavan, when he talked about here it's put standard of reality. I think in Tamil he would have used the word lakshana. Lakshana means the mark, what the hallmark of what is real. In this case, I think because he's talking to someone who doesn't have a good grounding in this philosophy, he mentions self-existent also for good measure. Self-existent means it exists by itself. It doesn't depend on any other thing for existing. So anything that comes into existence at one time and ceases to exist at another time is not self-existent, because its existence is dependent on time. Only when the time is ripe does it come into existence, and when its time is over, it ceases to exist. So it's a time-dependent reality. That applies to ego. Ego comes into existence at one time, it ceases to exist at another time. So it's neither self-shining nor self-existent. It borrows it. We as ego borrow our existence from our own reality. That is Sat-Chit. We borrow our existence from the existence from our real existence, the existence of ourself as we actually are, and we borrow our awareness from the real awareness that we actually are, the pure awareness. So ego is neither self-existent nor self-shining. As for the world doesn't shine by itself. It shines only in the view of ego, and it doesn't exist by itself. It exists only in the view of ego. So without ego, the world doesn't exist. So it's not self-existent. It's a dependent existence. It depends upon ego, both for its existence, its seeming existence, that is, and its shining. And ego depends for its existence and shining upon the one real existence, which is real existence and real awareness, in other words, Sat-Chit, which is Atma-swarupa, which alone is what actually exists.
Yes.
So, I mean, I could go on citing more and more examples from Bhagavan's teaching. For example, on the question of what is real, Bhagavan, in the first sentence of verse 13 of Uludunapadu, Bhagavan implies what he also said in the first sentence of paragraph 7 of Nana. In other words, what actually exists is only Atma-swarupa. Here he puts it in slightly different words, but it implies the same. He says, very, very simple words. Jnanamam tane me. Jnanamam, jnanam means, in this context, it means awareness, pure awareness, the awareness that we actually are. Jnanam am, which is, am means, in this case, it's an adjectival participle. Jnanamam tane. Tan means oneself. Tane means oneself alone. That is the suffix a is an intensifier, but in this context implies alone. So jnanamam tane means oneself who is awareness alone. Now, only oneself who is awareness. Me means what is real. So only we alone are what is real. But we, not we as this person, but we take ourselves to be, but we as jnana, the pure awareness I am. And then he goes on to say, Nanabam jnanam ajnanamam. Nanabam jnanam literally means the jnana or awareness or knowledge, which is many, which is manifold, which is various. Nana means various or diverse. So the awareness which is many, what it implies is the awareness of many things. In an earlier version of this verse, when Bhagavan composed this verse, and then the same day he rewrote it to pack more into it. But in the earlier version, he said, I think he said, Jnanam Andre Unme. That means awareness alone is real. So he didn't include Tan there. He didn't include oneself. So that's why he afterwards omitted it. He modified it in order to pack in more. So he said, awareness alone is real. Then he went on to say, Nana vai kankindra jnanam. That means the awareness which sees as many. That is one. What actually exists is only one thing, which is ourself, as pure awareness, as jnana. But now we see ourselves as all this multiplicity. So that's why he said the awareness that sees as many. That implies the awareness that sees the one thing that actually exists as many things. That is ajnanam. That is ignorance. So knowing, according to Bhagavan, knowing many things is not knowledge, it is ignorance. True knowledge is just knowing and being what we actually are. So long as we know anything other than ourselves, that is ignorance. And then he goes on to say, Poyam ajnaname, jnanamam tanne andri indru. That means even awareness, which is unreal, even ajnana, even ignorance, which is unreal, alone, he puts an emphasis on that. That is ajnana mum, means even, and a is an intensifier. So even that ignorance, which is unreal. So the knowing many things is ignorance. That ignorance is unreal. But even that ignorance, jnanamam tanne indru, andri indru, even that ignorance doesn't exist as andri means as other than. It can also mean except or besides oneself, but it implies it's nothing other than oneself. If we give us the most literal translation, it is even ignorance, which is unreal, doesn't exist besides oneself, who is jnana. When he says besides, it has no independent existence. In other words, it's nothing other than that. And he then gives an analogy to illustrate this. Anigal tam palabum poi. The ornaments, the many ornaments, or the multiplicity of ornaments, is unreal. Meam ponne andri undo. Do they exist besides gold, which is real, or do they exist as other than gold, which is unreal? Sorry, which is real. In the analogy, gold is the substance, the poral or the vastu. That is what is real. Only for, I mean, obviously gold isn't real. That's
No,
not what he's saying. It's for the sake of the analogy. He says, relative to the ornaments, the gold is real, because the same ornaments, today you can have a collection of bangles, and tomorrow you can melt them down into a necklace and a collection of rings. So the forms change. That the ornaments are just the forms, but the substance that endures is the gold. So the knowledge of multiplicity is analogous to the many ornaments. It's something that is constantly subject to change and therefore not real. What is enduring is the underlying awareness that is ourself, the pure awareness. So that is what is real. So with regard to the other part of your question, which, if I remember correctly, was sorry, what was the second part? Yes, how to unrealize the unreal.
Unrealize the unreal, yes.
Right. I think this has reference to something that Bhagavan sometimes used to say. That is, the word self-realization is used a lot in English. Bhagavan generally didn't speak English. I mean, he understood English, but he was reluctant to speak more than a few words in English. But sometimes he would rarely say simple sentences in English when it was particularly relevant to say it in English. So regarding the English term self-realization, Bhagavan sometimes said about this, and because he's talking about the word realize, he said it in English. He said, there's nothing for us to realize. What is real is always real. So it need not be realized. The problem is that we have realized the unreal. So what is required now is not that we realize the real, but we simply unrealize the unreal. This has been recorded, but I think not so clearly in Day by Day. There's a portion in the entry of 1911-46. That's 19th of November 1946. A visitor asked, when a man realizes the self, what will he see? Bhagavan said, there's no seeing. Seeing is only being. The state of self-realization, as we call it, is not attaining something new or reaching some goal which is far away, but simply being that which you always are and which you always have been. All that is needed is for you to give up your realization of the not true as true. All of us are realizing, i.e., regarding as real, what is not real. We have only to give up this practice on our part. Then we shall realize the self as the self. In other words, be the self. At one stage, one will laugh at oneself, but one tried to discover the self, which is so self-evident. So what can one say? What can we say to these questions? That stage transcends the seer and the seen. There is no seer there to see anything. The seer who is seeing all this now ceases to exist and the self alone remains. So that was Bhagavan's answer to that question. But I don't know if on this occasion he said it in English, because it's more elaborate. He may have said it partly in Tamil and partly in English. But anyway, the point is that Bhagavan often used to say, the problem is that we've realized the unreal. So all we have to do is to unrealize the unreal, and the real alone will remain. So what does he mean by this? As we've been saying, what is real, according to Bhagavan, what is real is only ourself. Not ourself as this what we now take ourselves to be, but ourselves as we actually are. That is always real. That need not be realized. The problem is we've now realized what is unreal. That is by rising as ego. That is the nature of ego. It's always to grasp the form of a body as I. That body obviously doesn't exist independent of ego because it appears only when we rise as ego. So when we rise as ego, we simultaneously project a body and experience that body as I. So by rising as ego, we realize the unreal. That is, this body is wholly unreal. We make it seem to be real because we take it to be ourselves. Since we are real, whatever we take to be ourselves seems to us to be real. So this body seems to us to be real because we experience it now as I, as ourself. But this body appears to us to be just a small part of this huge world, but also comes into existence when we rise as ego. That we don't experience a body in a vacuum. We experience a body in a world. So, but since we experience the body as I, the body seems to us to be real. And since the body is a part of the world, the whole world just seems to be real. So by rising as ego, we superimpose our own reality upon ego, upon the body, sorry, and thereby upon the world. We can understand this from dream. So long as we are dreaming, the dream body seems to be I, and the dream world seems to be real. But as soon as we wake up from a dream, we immediately recognize, oh, that was just a dream. In other words, it was unreal. Why were we not able to recognize that so long as we were dreaming, but are able to recognize it as soon as we wake up? For the simple reason that so long as we were dreaming, we were experiencing that dream body as I. So that dream body seems to be real, and hence the whole dream world seems to be real. When we wake up, we are going from one dream to another dream. So our identification with that dream body is now switched to this body. So now we experience this body as I. Then we recognize, oh, that body was just a mental fabrication. And likewise, the whole world was a fabrication. So we realize the unreal by rising as ego. So how to unrealize the unreal? So long as we rise and stand as ego, we experience a body as I. In other words, we experience the body as real. We experience the unreal as real. So we cannot unrealize the unreal except by ceasing to rise as ego. We cease to rise as ego every night when we fall asleep. So in sleep, we don't realize the unreal. We don't take the body to be real. We don't take the world to be real because there's no body or world in sleep. There's only we alone exist and shine in sleep. But as soon as we rise as ego, we project a body and world. And because we take the body to be I, the body seems real and the world seems real. So in order to unrealize the unreal in the manner that Bhagavan implied when he said all we need to do is to unrealize the unreal, sleep is obviously not a solution because sleep is just a state of manolaya. It's a state of temporary dissolution of mind. So it's one among a number of states of laya. That is, sleep is a state of laya. Coma is a state of laya. If you have general anesthesia for undergoing some surgery, that is a state of manolaya. If you overdose on drugs or something, you probably go into a coma-like state. That is manolaya. If you practice yoga, if you practice pranayama and other yoga techniques, if you're adept at those techniques, you can go into a state that is called nivikalpa samadhi, kevala nivikalpa samadhi. That is, as Bhagavan said, that is also a state of manolaya. states of Manolaya are very pleasant when they last. We all like to sleep. But sooner or later we wake up again, so it's not a solution. Even Nirvikalpa Samadhi, some yogis, Bhagavan told the story of a yogi who was so adept at going into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but he once went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 300 years. Immediately before going into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he had just woken up from one period in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. He was feeling thirsty. He asked his disciple to fetch water from nearby Ganga. When the disciple came back with the water, the yogi had already gone back into samadhi. And that time he went into samadhi so deeply, he remained in that state for 300 years. That is, in a really deep state of nirvikalpa samadhi, the body remains almost in a state of suspended animation. That is, the breathing slows down to maybe one slight breath per minute or something. And likewise, the heart beat, everything slows down. So it's possible for the body to remain in that state for an extremely long period. So in the story Bhagavan told, that yogi remained in that state for 300 years. After 300 years, when he woke up, the first thing he did was he angrily asked, "Where's my water?" So what Bhagavan said regarding the implication of this story is, even the last thought that was in his mind before he went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi was the first thought that popped up in his mind when he woke up. That means even the most superficial thought in his mind was not destroyed in spite of remaining in that state for 300 years. So what to say about all the vasanas? Vasanas are not weakened or destroyed, no matter how long we remain in a state of laya. If we have a car accident and are in coma for 10 years, after 10 years when we wake up, we come back with all the same vasanas. But Bhagavan implied this in the 8th paragraph of Nana, where he said, even by pranayama, the mind will. Wait a second, I'll read the paragraph because it's an instructive paragraph. Or at least the earlier portion of the paragraph I'll read. What he says is, for the mind to cease, except vicharana. Vicharana means implies Atma-vichara, self-investigation. Except vicharana, there are no other adequate means. If made to subside or cease by other means, the mind remaining as if it had ceased will rise up again. In other words, even if the mind subsides by other means, it will remain subsided for a while and it will again rise up. And then he goes on to say, even by pranayama, breath restraint, the mind will cease or subside. However, so long as the prana remains subsided, the mind will also remain subsided. And when the prana emerges, the mind will also emerge and wander under the sway of its vasanas. So what he is warning us here is that doesn't matter how long you remain in nirvikalpa samadhi or any other state of manolaya, it's just a temporary state. When the mind rises, it will again wander under the sway of its vasanas. So manolaya is obviously not a solution to our problem. It's very pleasant, but it's just a temporary respite. So we need to, since the root of all unreality seems to exist only when we rise as ego. So it's only by rising as ego that we make the unreal appear to be real. So in order to unrealize it, we need to cease rising as ego in such a way that we never rise again. So as Bhagavan says in verse 13 of Upadeshundya, dissolution meaning he just says dissolution, but he's in the context, he's obviously referring to dissolution of mind. Dissolution of mind is of two kinds, laya and nasa. Laya means temporary dissolution. Nasa means annihilation, in other words, permanent dissolution. And then he says that which is dissolved in laya will rise again. If its form dies, it will not rise again. So our aim is not manolaya, our aim is manonasa. That is to bring about the destruction of mind. So what is the difference between manolaya and manonasa? The difference lies, I mean, obviously one is temporary, one is impermanent, but why are some states of dissolution of mind only temporary and this nasa alone is permanent? It depends on how you go into manolaya. Every night when we fall asleep, we go into a state of manolaya, what we call sleep. How do we go into that state? Because we are too tired to continue working. In the morning when you wake up, you may want to go back to sleep, but if you slept enough, you cannot sleep even if you want to. But when it comes to the end of the day, even if you want to stay up to watch something on television or to have a party or whatever it is, sooner or later the sleep will overpower you. Because ultimately, the one thing we like above all other things is we like sleep. We can see this very plainly. If you try to deprive yourself of sleep, everything else will lose its attraction. You won't, even if you're offered the tastiest meal, you won't want to eat it. Even if you're offered whatever pleasures it may be, you don't want anything except just to lie down and sleep, because sleep is the one state in which we experience every day, but in which we have respite from all this constant activity, this vyavahara, this samsara, the constant ceaseless activity. So we fall asleep because of tiredness. If you have a coma, it may be because you have a drug overdose or because you have an accident and a head injury. So many reasons can be there to inducing a coma. In the case of general anesthesia, it's obviously the drugs the anesthetist gives you. In the case of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, it's because of some yoga practices, pranayama, and associated practices that you bring about that state. So all these states of manolaya are brought about by some means other than knowing ourselves. Knowing ourselves means knowing what we actually are. So in order to bring about manonasa, the only means is to know what we actually are. Why is that? Because ego or mind is nothing but a false awareness of ourself. That is what the mind essentially is, as Bhagavan said in verse 18 of, implied in verse 18 of Upadeshundya, that I referred to earlier. All other thoughts are constantly changing, but the one thought that is constant throughout all states of waking and dream is the thought I. Why? The thought I means ego. Why is ego the one constant thought? Because ego is the subject. All other thoughts are objects. The objects exist only in the view of the subject. So no other thought can exist without ego. This Bhagavan says in the 5th paragraph of Nana, he says it very clearly. He says, Manadil tondrum nenevugu labatricum nanenum neneve mudal nenevu. That means of all the thoughts that appear in the mind, the thought called I alone is the mudal nenevu. Mudal nenevu means the first thought, or the mudal can mean first, primal, basic, original, or causal thought. So the first thought, the causal thought, the origin of all other thoughts is this thought called I. Whenever he talks about the thought called I, he's referring to ego. And then he says, Idu arunda pirahe, ania nenevgul erukindrana. Only after this rises do other thoughts rise. Only after this refers to the thought called I, ego. So only after ego rises, other thoughts rise. In verse 7 of Uludunapta, which we were talking about earlier, he said that the world and the awareness rise and subside simultaneously. But here he says, but first this thought I, ego, rises, and then all other thoughts rise. Is there a contradiction? There he said simultaneously, here he says, but only after this rises do others rise. No, it is not a contradiction, because as soon as we rise as ego, all other thoughts, in other words, all phenomena come into existence. It is simultaneous. So why does he say only after Pirahe? What he means here, he's talking about the causal sequence. There are many examples we can give of simultaneous causation. That is, the effect and the cause happening simultaneously. For example, if a moving billiard ball hits a stationary billiard ball, as soon as the cause is the collision, and the effect is the stationary billiard ball starts moving. This occurs simultaneously. Or take another example, say in a car accident, maybe a car skids on the road and hits a tree. As soon as the car hits the tree, both the tree and the car are damaged. So the cause is the collision, and the effect is instantaneous. But we can, though the damage to the tree and the car happens simultaneously with the collision, we can legitimately say only after the collision the damage occurs. That doesn't mean that that's not talking about the time sequence, but about the causal sequence, because the cause always logically has to precede the effect. So even if cause and effect happen simultaneously, the cause is in terms of the causal sequence, the cause is antecedent or prior to the effect. So when he says only after this rises do other thoughts rise, he's not saying that first ego rises and then other thoughts rise. What he's saying is, what he implies is, as soon as ego rises, other thoughts rise. But no other thought can rise prior to ego. Why is that? Because all other thoughts, and when he talks about thoughts, he means all phenomena, because as he said in the previous verse, the world is nothing but thoughts. In the previous paragraph, he had said the world is nothing but thoughts. So thoughts here is not just a mental chatter, it's all types of mental impressions, all mental phenomena. In other words, all phenomena are thoughts, according to Bhagavan. So as soon as we rise as ego, all other thoughts appear. That's our experience. When we wake from sleep, the body and world appear instantaneously. So it's a case of simultaneous causation. But the cause is the rising of ego. The effect is the appearance of everything else, because everything else appears only in the view of ego. So that's why he says only after this rises do other thoughts rise. This meaning the first thought, I, ego. Then in the next sentence, he says exactly the same thing, but using different terms. In the next sentence, he says, Tanme tondria pirahe, munile padake gal tondru kindrana. Tanme means the first person. Munile padake gal means second and third persons. So only after the first person appears do second and third persons appear. What's he mean here by first person, second person, and third person? First person is ego, I. The thought called I, he refers to as the first person. Munile padake, second and third persons, means all objects or phenomena, all other things appear only after ego appears, in other words. And then he says, Tanmay Indri Munile Padikegal Ira. Without the first person, second and third persons do not exist. In other words, without ego, nothing else exists. All things known by the ego come into existence only when ego comes into existence. When ego doesn't exist, they do not exist. So all unreal things depend for their semi-existence on the semi-existence of ourself as ego. So the first cause, the cause of all other, the cause of all effects, the ultimate cause, the first cause, is the arising of ourself as ego. That is, people ask, what is the cause for the rising of ego? That is a question that cannot be answered for two reasons. Firstly, because ego is the first cause. Cause and effect is the nature of the nature of the manifest world, we can say. In other words, the nature of phenomena is phenomena. Within phenomena, we can analyze and find causes and effects. But before any, we can say the subject is the cause of the objects, because the objects appear only in the view of the subject. So the subject is ego, the first person. But what is the cause of the subject, we cannot say, because the cause and effect come into existence only after we rise as ego. So ego is the cause of causation itself. So there's no cause for the rising of ego. That's one reason why Bhagavan said we cannot say there's a cause for the rising of ego. The second reason is, if we seem to be ego only so long as we're looking outwards. So long as we're looking at other things, we who are looking at those other things seem to be ego. But when instead of looking at other things, if we look at ourselves, there's no such thing as ego to be found. Because if we look at ourselves carefully enough, we'll see what we actually are is just pure awareness. So ego, there's no cause for the rising of ego, because ultimately no such thing as ego has ever arisen. That is a very simple analogy to illustrate this is, if we see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, the snake seems to be, that if rope seems to be a snake, so long as we don't look at it carefully enough. If we're too afraid to go close to it, we're going to continue to believe it's a snake. The only way to overcome our fear of that snake is to see what it actually is. So when Bhagavan tells us, no, it is not a snake, it's just a rope, to us it still looks like a snake, so we're still afraid. But if we have trust in what Bhagavan says, we will go a little bit closer and we'll look at it carefully. And what do we see when we look at it carefully? Oh, it's not a snake, it's only a rope. So what was the snake never actually existed. Likewise, ego doesn't actually exist. So we cannot find a cause for the rising of ego. Moreover, in the case of the snake, we can say the cause is our ignorance. We mistook it to be one thing. So we can say our ignorance or our misperception is the cause. But in the case of ego, we cannot even say that, because in whose view does ego exist? Ego doesn't exist in the view of pure awareness. It exists only in the view of ego. So ego itself is the ignorance that causes itself to appear. So, ego is the false awareness, I am this body. That is ignorance, that is avidya, that is ajnana. So, as Bhagavan often said, ego itself is ajnana or avidya. There's no ignorance other than ego. And if we look at ego carefully enough, we'll see there's no such thing as ego at all. So long as we rise as ego, other things seem to exist. So long as we attend to those other things, we seem to be ego. But instead of attending to other things, if we attend to ourselves to see who am I, if we attend to ourselves keenly enough, we will see that what we actually are is just pure awareness. That is, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we are thereby withdrawing our attention from everything else. And when we attend to ourselves so keenly, but we cease to be aware of anything other than ourselves, the state in which we're aware of nothing other than ourselves is pure awareness. So by self-attentiveness, if we attend to ourselves keenly enough, we will experience ourselves as pure awareness. As soon as we experience ourselves as pure awareness, which is what we actually are, ego, which is a false awareness of ourselves, is thereby destroyed. That is, we now mistake ourselves to be this body because we are not experiencing ourselves as the pure awareness that we actually are. If we attend to ourselves and thereby experience ourselves as pure awareness, we will thereby um, uh, cease to be ego. So this is how manonasa, the annihilation of mind, is brought about. So coming back to your question, how to realize the unreal, the root of the unreal is ego. So we can unrealize the unreal only by seeing the reality of ego, finding out what ego actually is. What is the underlying reality? The underlying reality of ego is Satchit, pure being awareness. That is what we actually are. And we can find that out only by self-investigation, Atma-vichara, which is, as Bhagavan made clear, is just self-attentiveness. In other words, only by attending to ourselves can we know ourselves as we actually are, and thereby put an end to this appearance of this unreal appearance of ego and world. So to unrealize the unreal, we need to unrealize ego. To unrealize ego, we need to see what is the actual reality of ego, what ego actually is. Who am I?
Yes.
So have I answered the question adequately?
Yes, of course, more than adequately, actually. And yeah, the problem we're facing is that we are the reality that we ourselves actually are. We are, by looking outwards, rising as ego, we are constantly transferring that reality onto things,
Yeah.
onto the body and onto the world that we are perceiving. And so that in itself is like I guess the discrimination is very important uh, at first, because from the standpoint of where the waking state, uh, we cannot consider, for example, Bhagavan tells us, yes, that we are self alone,
Yeah.
are what actually exist. But from the standpoint of ego and consider ourselves to be this body, we cannot conceive other state as more real than this state we are in now. I mean, we can infer there is, yes, there is the reality of ourselves
Yeah.
actually something different than what we are experiencing now. But somehow it's like
The
I cannot
problem
be
is,
on this waking state. Yes.
yeah, the
So.
problem is, as Bhagavan put it very nicely, we
Mhm.
have realized the unreal.
Yes.
By
Hmm.
rising as ego, we superimpose our own reality upon this body and world.
Hmm.
That is the problem. And because we take ourselves to be this body, we feel that we are dependent on the world. We need food, we need clothing, we need shelter, we need this, we need that.
Hmm.
What we actually are is the infinite ocean of perfect happiness, perfect love. But now we've limited ourselves, so we now experience ourselves as something deficient. We always feel we're lacking something. That's why we cannot find satisfaction from anything in this world. We seek satisfaction in so many things, in tasty food, in having more money, in having loving friends, in intellectual pursuits, in sporting pursuits, in this, in that. We are constantly seeking to satisfy ourselves with things other than ourselves. But none of these things can satisfy us, because only infinite happiness will satisfy us. And as this ego, experiencing ourselves as this finite person, we cannot experience infinite happiness. But this is the really tricky part of Maya. Because we've limited ourselves, we feel deficient. Since we feel deficient, in order to fill up this deficiency or compensate for this deficiency, we look for things outside. We start off by looking for material things, but then we find we don't get happiness from the things of the world. So then we begin to think of God. But we still take God to be something other than ourselves. So we go seeking God outside. Because God is the infinite whole, so let me find him. But we constantly, because we feel ourselves to be small, and God is the greatest of all, so we look for God outside. Or even if we don't think of it in terms of God, we are still looking for something outside. Even if we are Buddhist or Jain and we don't have an idea of God, we're still thinking that there's something we're lacking and something we have to gain. So that nirvana, that enlightenment, it's somewhere in the future. It's in future, it's something outside ourselves. So nirvana doesn't lie in the future. If nirvana is not here and now, it's not going to be in the future either. So we have to find it within ourselves. That is why the Upanishads tell us, whatever we may be seeking, you're seeking happiness, you are that. We're seeking God, you are that. We're seeking Brahman, you are that. We're seeking knowledge, you are that. Why do they say you are that? Because so long as we're looking outwards, looking at anything other than ourselves, we're not going to get whatever we are seeking. What we are all seeking ultimately is infinite happiness, because that's our very nature. Because infinite happiness is our real nature. Nothing less than that can satisfy us. So we're all, knowingly or unknowingly, seeking infinite happiness. And we cannot find it in anywhere outside. So the Upanishads tell us, you are that, to turn our attention back towards ourselves. That's why Bhagavan's teaching is constantly stressing the need to attend to ourselves. The one thing that is the one message underlying all of Bhagavan's teachings: look at yourself, see yourself, investigate yourself, turn your attention inwards. What is God? God is your own reality. God is what is shining in you as I. So to know God, you need to look within. What is happiness? That is you. Search it for it within. What is real knowledge? We can't get knowledge from science. We can't get knowledge from religion or philosophy or any of these things. True knowledge can be found only by turning within and seeing what we actually are. As he says in verse 16 of Upadeshundiya, Veli Vidyangale Vittu, letting go of all Veli Vishayam. Vidyam is a plural form of the Sanskrit Vishaya. So giving up all Vishayas, all objects, all phenomena, everything other than ourselves. Manam tan oli uru ordale, the mind knowing its own form of light. Its own form of light means its own awareness. It's that fundamental awareness I am. In Sanskrit, he says chitva, awareness. Manam tanoli uru ordale, unme unichiam. That alone is real awareness. Or unichi can be taken as awareness or knowledge. So real knowledge is not seeing anything outside. According to Bhagavan, knowing many things is ignorance. Knowing ourselves, turning our attention back within, that alone is real knowledge.
Yeah. He also in Atma-vichara in the first verse, he says that though oneself exists incessantly and indubitably as real. That is not probably
Yeah,
not the
yeah,
case right now for us, but
yeah.
the body and world which are unreal arise sprouting are real. That's the problem.
Exactly,
It's
exactly.
not only the reality that we project onto the world, it's also the happiness that seems to be real, that we need
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
to uh, to survive.
yeah,
Yes, that we acquire from the world.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm. So and when Bhagavan says in the first Mangalam verse there, when he points out that we are that reality that transcends thought,
yes,
and obviously we are aware. I mean, that's an indubitable fact. Yes, we can say, no doubt, we are aware. Yes,
yes, yes.
the thing is, now we're aware of more things than only awareness.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So when he says that the existing awareness, yes, it's here, it's present, the existing
yeah,
awareness. So that is like the uh, like a clue or the sign that that reality beyond thought exists truly,
yeah.
because otherwise without awareness we wouldn't exist.
And where does it exist? It doesn't exist outside. It exists in the heart. That means within ourselves, in
Hmm.
the very core of our being, the
Hmm.
very center of ourself.
the the thing for in practice, when we do Atma-vichara and we turn our attention within, uh, obviously there is awareness without awareness there wouldn't be another thing, but uh, the awareness seems to pervade everything, the whole body,
Mm.
like the all the adjuncts. So
Yes,
it's very the intricacy of the knot is very is hard to disentangle, because it's
yes.
you feel pain, and awareness seems to be in that pain,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
and you feel a strong emotion, and the awareness seems to be part of it,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
one and the same thing. Yeah.
But regarding the difficulty, it when we look within to see what we actually are, we, we're aware that we are, but we don't seem to be able to distinguish ourselves from all these adjuncts.
Hmm.
So, how to overcome this difficulty? The answer is practice, more and more practice. But how this practice works, it's important to understand. That is why we are not able to distinguish at present, we're not able to distinguish ourselves from all these adjuncts, is because we have very, very strong attachment to these adjuncts. So the reason we are not able to distinguish is we are not willing to see ourselves separate from these things, because we're so attached, we're so strongly identified. The abhimanam is so strong.
Hmm.
This is where this is another very, very important feature of Bhagavan's teaching. Bhagavan often said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. The importance of this teaching cannot be overstressed, because the whole problem is now we have so much attachment to this body and mind, so much desire for the things of the world. So and we are not willing to give it up, because our very existence as ego depends upon our attachment to all these things, our desire for all these things. So the only way we will become willing to let go of all these things is when we have all-consuming love to know and to be what we actually are. And that love cannot come from outside. It cannot come from ego.
Mhm.
It can come only from the innermost depth of our being, because our real nature is infinite love. Um, so the love that is required to turn within doesn't come from ego, because the nature of ego is always to go outwards and grasp things other than itself. So the love to turn within comes only from grace. But that grace, as Bhagavan said, grace is not something external. It's not something that's up in heaven. It's going to descend down upon us. Grace is what is our own being. But our own real nature is grace. So it's from our real nature that love to attend to ourself comes. So the very fact that we are now, at least to a small extent, curious to look within to see what we actually are, even this slight liking that we have now, that is the seed planted in our heart by grace. Though that grace is always in our heart, so long as we're looking outwards, that is, though Bhagavan taught that the highest devotion is to turn within and just to sink back into our heart, Bhagavan knew the nature of the mind is always going outwards. So when the mind is going outwards, it's appropriate to have a name or form of God to cling to. God means, as Bhagavan says in the 12th paragraph of Nana, Unmail, Kadavulam Guruvam, Unmail Verala. God and Guru are in truth not other. So the ultimate form of God is Guru. So long as our minds are going outwards, we've got Bhagavan to cling to. And so long as we cling to Bhagavan, he'll be constantly reminding us, turn within, turn within. This form isn't Guru. Guru is what is shining in your heart as I. So, as we can see from, for example, Arunachal Stuti Panchakam, Bhagavan, Bhagavan is, if we read Aksharamlai very superficially, Bhagavan is worshipping an outward name and form of a hill as God and Guru. But if we pay close attention to what he's saying, he's constantly emphasizing this great arrow on a hill is always shining in the heart as I. So that is that worship of name and form and the trying to turn within, these are complementary. If we really understand what is the secret of this devotion to name and form, we are praying to that outward name and form to give us the love to turn within. So to really understand Bhagavan's teachings, of course we need to understand Uladu Napadu, Nana, Upadesha Undya, Anma Vidya, all these works. We need to understand the basic underlying philosophy, but to really how to apply this philosophy in practice, the key is Arunachaksharamlai and the other hymns of Arunachal Stuti Panchakam. Because as Bhagavan said, that love is the key. And that love, it has to be love to turn within. Yeah. But our mind still has a taste to go outward. So it's good to have an outward person in the form of Bhagavan for us, or for Bhagavan, he took Arunachala to have that outward form. And if when that outward form is trying to push us back within, we shouldn't resist that. Because we should always remember what is shining through. When we see Bhagavan, we see so much love in his eyes, so much clarity in his words. But what is it that is shining in the form of that love and clarity? It is our own being that is shining. That's why Bhagavan's outward form is so attractive to us. Because it's not the form that is, I mean, it's a body like any other body. Yes. But when we see Bhagavan's eyes, there's something special about Bhagavan's eyes. Because what is shining through that form is our own reality. And in that form, he is constantly reminding us through his teachings, both through his jnana teachings, we can say, and through his bhakti teachings, which are 100% complementary. He's constantly stressing the need to turn within. Even in the first verse of Aksharamlai, He's saying Arunachala Mena Ahame Nine Pava Ahate Verarupai Arunachala. That Ahame has two meanings. One is Arunachala, one meaning of Ahame is only I. So Arunachala is only I. So those who think within the heart, but Arunachala is only I, you annihilate their ego. Ahame also means in the heart. So, but whichever way we take it, whether we take ahame there to mean only I or in the heart, it's pointing us back towards ourselves. So, Bhagavan, I mean, that Arunachala Stuti Panchakam is so wonderful because Bhagavan has really revealed what is the real secret of bhakti. And that bhakti, when we feel love, where do we feel love? We feel love in our heart. We feel the love comes from within ourselves. So that is the source of love, but it's coming from within ourselves. So we have to seek that love within ourselves. And that is what Bhagavan is teaching us in so many beautiful ways through Arunachala Stuti Panchakam, particularly Arunachala Aksharam.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. That love is makes us store within, but of course, it's supported by the understanding of.
But without that love, we will never turn within.
Yeah.
So that is, people think jnana it's an intellectual path. It's only for people who like to think a lot. That is not at all the case. It is quite the opposite. The path of jnana is the pinnacle of the path of bhakti. Because bhakti, what is the highest bhakti? What is the highest love? To give yourself wholly to the one you love. So complete surrender is the aim of the path of bhakti, complete self-surrender. And that self-surrender can be brought about only by turning within, because the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by looking outwards. So long as we're looking outwards, we're not surrendering ourselves. So the true surrender can be completed only by looking within. So Bhagavan has given us such a beautiful, rich blending of the highest bhakti, the most heart-melting bhakti, and the clearest and most uncompromising jnana in the form of his Upadesha works.
Yeah,
and both are necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Each one is complemented by the other. And this is how to unrealize the unreal.
Mm-hmm.
So long as we experience the unreal as real, we will continue to have desire and attachment for it.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to shift the focus of our desire and attachment. If we're going to desire anything, desire to be as we actually are. If we're going to be attached to anything, be attached to our own being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that is true bhakti.
Mm-hmm. It's only one focus. We just have to focus on that.
Exactly.
Regardless of how many directions our mind wants to go.
And that one focus, that ekagrita, one single-mindedness, one-pointedness, that is contrary to the very nature of ego. Ego is constant dissipation. Mm-hmm. That is, ego is Maya. And the two powers of Maya are Varana, which is the veiling. That's taking mm-hmm. ourselves to be this body. That's the Avarana. Mm-hmm. And consequently seeing all this, that is the Vikshepa. Vikshepa means scattering, dispersing. So the nature of ego is to be constantly going out, going here, there, thinking this. How many thousands of thoughts we think every day? Why? What's the necessity of this? All we need to think about is the one thing that actually exists, and that is I.
Yeah, that is also.
And thinking about I is a cessational thinking. It's not even thinking.
Yeah, and that very important thing that Bhagavan taught us is that the mind is the root of everything. So
exactly,
it's like
exactly.
the way back to
Yeah.
our self knowledge.